Hello and welcome. I'm Ayushman Singh Jamwal and you are watching CNN News 18's non-stop coverage on the Gulf War. When the United States and Israel launched its war, Operation Epic Fury, over the weekend, they were not expecting Iran to behave like a regional guerrilla force, a regional disruptor which is taking down the entire Middle East with it. Iran has attacked Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain and Oman. And more breaking news coming in as US President Donald Trump has now spoken out for the first time on the operation in the Middle East and the escalating tensions. A short while ago, President Donald Trump delivered an address on the widening West Asia war. Trump has said that the United States will avenge the deaths of US service personnel after Iran waged a war against civilization. Remember, 4 US personnel have been killed in the anti-Iranian operations. He further said, and I quote, "This was our last and best chance to strike, and what we are doing right now is something that will deliver peace to the region," is the pitch that's coming in from the US president. He has also said that the United States, as well as Israel, is committed to eliminating the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime, adding that the United States and Israel are ensuring that the sponsors of terror do not obtain a nuclear weapon. Listen in to Donald Trump.
This was our last best chance to strike what we're doing right now and eliminate the intolerable threats posed by this sick and sinister regime. And they are indeed sick and sinister. Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. We grieve for the 4 heroic American service members who have been killed in action and send our love and support to their families. In their memory, we continue this mission with ferocious, unyielding resolve to crush the threat this terrorist regime poses to the American people, and a threat indeed it is. We have the strongest and most powerful by far military in the world, and we will easily prevail. The United States military continues to carry out large-scale combat operations in Iran to eliminate the grave threats posed to America by this terrible terrorist regime. We warned Iran not to make any attempt to rebuild at a different location because they were unable to use the ones that we so powerfully blew up. But they ignored those warnings and refused to cease their pursuit of nuclear weapons. In addition, the regime's conventional ballistic missile program was growing rapidly and dramatically, and this posed a very clear, colossal threat to America and our forces stationed overseas.
And as the situation escalates in the Middle East, I'm joined by my colleague Sanjay Suri, who's joining us live from Tel Aviv. As the situation escalates in the West Asian region, and Donald Trump making it extremely clear that this is the right thing to do to eliminate the Iranian regime and to remove its capabilities to continue to wage war via its terror proxies. So, Sanjay, given the message coming in from Donald Trump, I think the region is in for the long haul.
Well, most certainly, though the operational specifics from Trump's speech are his remarks that on an hourly basis, the missile capacity of Iran is being degraded. Now, that suggests 2 things. One, that it is really active priority is quite potent that he uses the phrase hourly basis, and that really is the top priority militarily at the moment, because it is these missiles that are being launched from Iran that have been hitting home. They're hitting US bases, hitting nations across the Gulf region, hitting Israel here. And until these are neutralized, the problem will be spreading far beyond Iran as it has continued over the last few days. Now, if that capacity can be neutralized or neutralized even to a great extent, and if the capacity of Iran to launch these missiles gets blunted, then the difficulty and the issues remain confined to Iran, a little more manageable for the US for Israel, and for countries in the Gulf region. It all depends on how far this campaign succeeds, because Iran has them deep underground, a lot of these facilities, and even if some rogue elements remain, they can still cause a great deal of damage.
Right, but it seems that Iran has that intent to hit out not just at Israel, but also at US personnel as well as its bases in the wider Middle East, not even sparing certain buildings as well as key infrastructure in several of the big nations in the Gulf. Thank you, Sanjay, for getting us that update. We're also joined by Major Retired Dan Feferman, former IDF soldier, as well as a foreign policy expert, as well as Prabhu Dayal, former diplomat. Prabhu Dayal, I'll come to you first. Looking at the tone and tenor of Trump's speech, in your opinion, did he miscalculate this entire conflict? It's not as clean as what happened in Venezuela, and clearly he's under a lot of domestic pressure. He was aiming to alleviate that domestic pressure by having this kind of I would say, a face-saving military operation in the Middle East, but it's not gone all according to plan, no matter how his entire department tries to dress it up.
Well, you're absolutely right in pointing out that Iran is not Venezuela. It would not cave in the manner that Venezuela did. Secondly, yes, there was an attempt of at diverting attention. When Trump got a negative verdict from the Supreme Court on his tariffs, I had said at that very stage that he will do something to take attention away from the tariffs issue. And certainly, Iran was one such major issue which was looming. The United States was building up its military strength. It already had one aircraft carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln, and another one was on its way. So he was just waiting things to sort of build up to his advantage. Of course, he was engaging in talks. The United States was having talks on the nuclear issue with Iran, but frankly, all that was misleading. He never meant these talks in any degree of seriousness, because there was in any case a huge difference in the respective points of view of the United States and Iran. A meeting point was not at all on the horizon. And in fact, what was appearing more and more likely was that a conflict would occur. And that is precisely what happened. Now, what is the future course of events? I don't think that this war is going to end so quickly, because the Iranians have amassed a certain amount of strength. Moreover, there's nothing to rule out the fact that they can get assistance from China and even from Russia, because Iran has a huge land border with Afghanistan, also with Turkmenistan, and these are routes through which assistance in the form of more missiles and weapons can come for it from Russia and China. So I don't think that an early end to this conflict is all that easy, as President Trump probably thought initially. I think both Israel and America thought that this war would get over very quickly, that they would be able to bash up Iran and it would come down on its knees. Certainly it looked like that when on the first day Khamenei was assassinated, along with some of the top military commanders. Mm-hmm. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps has sunk in its heels and is prepared to fight, and it has widened the scope of the conflict by attacking a whole host of other countries, including countries in the Arabian Gulf, which are allies of the United States. So by widening the conflict, Iran has made it more complicated for not just these countries, but also for the Americans, because after all, they would like to protect their allies, and their allies, like for instance Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, Oman, would like the Americans to try and end this war. So there would be pressure which would be built up by all these countries which are allies in the Arabian Gulf of America to try and end this war.
Absolutely. And this was the no wars president when he came into power just a year back. Donald Trump came with that message that he will not entangle the United States in any other foreign conflict. And I am trying to remember what Henry Kissinger once said, that to be an enemy of America is dangerous, to be an ally is fatal. So are we seeing that play out in the Middle East as we speak? Prabhu Dayal and Dan Feferman, I'll just come to you in just a bit, Dan Feferman, to get your perspective on the situation in West Asia, because we're getting a piece of breaking news that's coming in where Indigo has planned 10 special relief operations from Jeddah to India. This is on the 3rd of March, and which is tomorrow, to facilitate the return of stranded passengers subject to required approvals as well as prevailing airspace conditions. Indigo is coordinating with the Consulate General of India in Jeddah for passenger facilitation. To get more details, I'm joined by my colleague Anvit Srivastav on the broadcast. So Anvit, slow and steady, that has been the resumption of flight operations on the ground, and clearly a lot of Indians stranded in the region. What more details can you get for us?
Yeah, certainly. And much relief for people who are stuck, Indians who are stuck and who had been wanting the flights to resume. And Indigo has come up with this announcement. In fact, Ministry of Civil Aviation has announced that Indigo will be carrying out 10 relief flights from the region to back to India. And Indians are expected to come on board. And this one, the one flight came today, the Etihad Airlines flight that came in today, that was a scheduled flight. So these are expected to be the relief flights that will specially be organized only to get Indians back home. Also, other than this, Air India, however, has extended its suspension of operations for one more day. On March 3rd till midnight, Air India has announced that all operations from the region will remain suspended. However, at the same time, Etihad has extended it for 2 days. Now, Etihad had come up with an announcement that till March 4, till afternoon, the flight operations will remain suspended. So this is a good news for the Indians who are who are stuck in the region, and they can probably come to Jeddah and then board a flight back to India. Today also we spoke to some of the people, and they said that they had been wanting to go to Jeddah or Abu Dhabi or Doha, but they fly because the flights in the region have been suspended. In fact, we are also learning that the Dubai airport is also gradually opening up operations, and there might soon be a number of flights operated from Dubai also. So people who are stuck in Dubai or maybe in Qatar and Jeddah in that region, so they good news for them. Also, many routes have been curtailed. Flights to Europe, probably to Frankfurt, Vienna, and many other locations, Copenhagen. These were also affected too. So when these airports become operationalized and flights are operated, then it is also expected that flights and routes to Europe will also ease down.
Right. Thank you, Anvit, for getting us that update. So much needed relief for a lot of Indian nationals in the region. Let's get back to our guest. Dan Feferman is joining us on the broadcast, a former IDF soldier as well as foreign policy expert. Dan Feferman, looking at the scenes that we're seeing on our screen right now, where there has been a serious escalation of this conflict, drawing in so many of the Middle Eastern powers. In your opinion, has there been a miscalculation when it comes to the precision nature of this operation?
I think there was a miscalculation on behalf of the Iranians.
All right.
They should have, if I was advising this regime, I would have told them to, of course, acquiesce to America's demands a long time ago. But given the situation we're in now, I think they made a critical mistake by expanding the conflict to the Sunni Arab countries, who would have been very happy to stay out of it, or to pay lip service, or to say that they won't host American or Israeli strikes on their territory. And now what the Iranians have been doing is managed to coalesce most of the region against them openly. News just came in that Qatar has shot down 2 Iranian jets over its territory, and of course the Saudis are threatening to get involved, and so this is definitely a miscalculation on their part. Hezbollah, of course, there was tension reportedly within Hezbollah whether to get involved or not, and Iran pushed them to get involved. They're firing at Israel all day, which is going to draw a massive Israeli retaliation against Hezbollah targets. One Hezbollah leader has reportedly been targeted, and Israel, the military, is going after Qasem Naim, and Hezbollah has even targeted British forces in or near Cyprus. And so, yes, this is, I think, a mistake on their part, and we're going to have to see what's going to happen in the next week or so now, given that President Trump has more or less articulated America's goals, and those can be achieved sooner or rather than later. And this is what we're going to be paying attention to now
Right.
over
But
the coming
Dan, but Dan, just to be fair, you've seen in the past as well how America has very focused goals when it comes to the Middle East, and then what happens in those conflict theaters, how the entire situation goes out of hand. The fear is that while there was a precision nature to the entire operation, by Iran drawing in the other nations and pretty much boosting its proxy networks, it's only escalating the situation. The security theater seems to be expanding beyond the scope of operations that we see right now. That is the initial fear. I want to get your view on that, but we're getting some more breaking news that's coming in. Prabhu Dayal, also, please stay with us, where what we are learning is that these are inputs brought to us by investigations editor Manoj Gupta, where the Dubai airport operations, primarily Dubai International Airport and Al Maktoum International, have started operations again. This is much needed relief when it comes to the air operations in the region. This after a multi-day full suspension due to the escalating Middle Eastern conflict involving Iranian retaliatory strikes. The major carriers like Emirates and Fly Dubai have confirmed that they are restarting a restricted number of flights tonight. I'm joined by my colleague Griha Atul on the broadcast to get more details. So, Griha, much needed relief for commuters who've been stranded in the region.
Yes, absolutely, Ayushman. And you said it perfectly there. Dubai International Airport and Al Maktoum Airport, that so far till about during the day on the 2nd of March had a rather abandoned look. Those of us who have, been to those airports, we do know it is one of the world's busiest airports that we're talking about. And seeing that airport in that fashion really came in as much surprise. But now we are learning that both the Al Maktoum and the Dubai International Airport are going to be resuming operations, though by and by. That is today evening, that's the 2nd of March evening, they have started limited flights, and particular emphasis has been given to repatriation priority bookings. We have already broken the story of players like PV Sindhu, who still was abandoned there at the airport, at Dubai International Airport, probably missing the All England Championship. Maybe this comes in at some sort of respite, as those are the people who get priority as far as these small number of flights are concerned. We're right now learning that that will be the emphasis, but particularly Emirates and Fly Dubai. These are the two flights that will resume the operations, and very soon, possibly by Tuesday, that is tomorrow, we will see if at all it will go up to full-scale operations. But Ayushman, the point to note is that the other major international carriers still they lay suspended. They are not yet going to be resuming operations. At least so far, there is no clarity on that. But as far as the airport itself is concerned, because remember, Dubai has been surprisingly impacted because of Iranian drones and missiles. And there has been a fair amount of fear amongst a lot of people who have been stranded there, particularly the number of Indians. That is, of course, a record number that continue to work and reside there in Dubai. They are wanting to come back home. And all of this information is going to come in as a huge amount of relief to all of those Indians as well, as they get that, in fact, little relief. And we're also, in fact, learning, and Manoj Gupta has brought us this information exclusively, that the people who had prior bookings will be given priority. So all of those people have been advised, particularly by the airport authorities, to wait for a message by the airport, by the respective airlines, and only then should they head to the airport, so that they avoid any kind of clutter or chaos further at the airport.
Right. So the system also being streamlined to ensure that they get to their destinations as painlessly as possible. Thank you, Griha, for getting us those details. Let's get back to our guest, Major Retired Dan Feferman, as well as Prabhu Dayal joining us on the broadcast. And Dan Feferman, I wanted to get your take on what I was pointing out about the escalation of the theater of conflict, as well as Iran's capacity to reboot its proxy elements. Is Israel confident that it can dismantle those proxy networks, which are pretty much, spread like a spider's web across the Middle East?
Well, those proxy networks were massively degraded over the last 2 years when they miscalculated against Israel. Hezbollah is estimated to be maybe 20% of what it was. And now Israel has all the legitimacy to go after much of the remaining 20%. If the Houthis decide to get involved, that's going to draw the ire not just of the Israelis, potentially now once again the Saudis, the Emiratis. I understand the French are positioning ships in the Red Sea or in the Indian Ocean near there. So it's actually going to do quite the opposite. What little ammunition they have left in the proxy magazine, so to speak. They're going to spend it wastefully, and it's going to give legitimacy. There's going to be a united U.S.-led front, a coalition of regional powers to take out these proxies. And so I think the Iranians, who already were dealt a very bad hand in this, miscalculated gravely, overplayed their hand. And of course, the one thing we've learned about the Iranians over the years is that their decision-making calculus is not a rational one. It is a jihadist one. It is a messianic, radical calculation, and the best thing that they can do right now is accept the demands of the U.S. administration, which Israel and many of the regional powers and the European powers agreed to, and that is, of course, to dismantle the nuclear program, the support for the proxies, the ballistic missile program, and the U.S. added that it's taking out the Iranian Navy, which is what is capable of disrupting oil shipments and shipping in general through the Straits of Hormuz. And so, no, you're seeing a short level escalation and expansion, which will speed up the dismantlement even more of Iran's proxy array.
Right. Right. We hope that that is the like the end game at the end of the day, given the fact that ending the proxy networks is something very essential for regional stability. But Prabhu Dayal, come in on this point. The fact that the war could extend to more than a week, it could extend in the days to come. Could some political capital be gained by the Iranian authorities as we speak, by the Iranian regime, to kind of, repackage this entire conflict as protecting the people of Tehran? Because we've seen the escalation of the conflict. At first, there were celebrations across the world that Khamenei had been killed. But could this politically turn around in favor of the Iranian regime?
Well, the longer they can stick it out, the stronger they will appear to their people. Because basically, they are trying to convey a message to their own people, and that is that they are not weak and that they are not going to come under pressure so easily. Now, I'm not an advocate for the Iranian side. I'm just a neutral observer. I subscribe to the view of my government, and that is that it is not an era of war. We are against war. Now, there is no doubt that this particular war was started 3 days ago by the Americans and the Israelis. We were not in favor of starting the war. And of course, there is a whole background to it. They perceived Iran as a regional threat. Israel has always perceived Iran as an existentialist threat. I served in Iran, and I used to hear chants of death to America, death to Israel. So the Iranian approach and the Iranian mentality is something which is not palatable to either the United States or to Iran. But there were talks which were underway, and both sides were indicating that there was some degree of progress that was taking place. So people in India were optimistic that some result would come out of these talks and that there would be no recourse to aggression, that there would be no recourse to war.
Right.
However, while these talks were still underway, the attacks took place. And I think many of us in India were disappointed because we don't want our region to be engulfed in such conflicts. We already have a very big conflict taking place immediately to our west between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Now, if further west, in Iran and the entire region, there is conflict, then certainly that will impact us in a variety of ways. Our oil supplies, our trade, our diaspora, which is in excess of 9 million there, all these will be very adversely affected. So we want an early resolution, but the way things are shaping out, the way the Iranians have dug in, it doesn't seem that an early solution is so easily going to be found.
Right, but Dan Feferman is very confident that the more this conflict drags on, the more Iran will be pushed to the talking table to, adhere to the American deal. Now, you've served in Iran. How do you see that analysis coming in from Dan Feferman?
Well, I've served both in Iran and the United States. And I've always found that their viewpoints are poles apart. And during these recent talks, there was some attempt, also with the help of mediators like Oman, to try and have some kind of an arrangement where a midway deal, a midway arrangement can be arrived at, a deal could be found. Now that is out of the question.
Right.
And Dan Pepperman's view is, I think, well established also, that the adjoining countries will be very hostile to Iran. They already are, because nobody likes to have missiles raining down on them. So Iran has increased the hostility to, as it is, there were factors which were dividing Iran and the
Right.
Arab countries.
Prabhu
The
Dayal,
Shia Sunni factor.
Prabhu Dayal, let me get a little more direct with my question. Given the fact that Iran has now refused to negotiate with the United States on any matter, is Iran capable of going scorched earth when it comes to the Middle East instead of adhering to the demands coming in from the United States, or even entertaining the concept of negotiations? Is it willing to go scorched earth across the Middle East?
I have a feeling that what the Iranians are trying to do is to widen the scope of the conflict so that the countries to the south of it, that is UAE, Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they pressurize the Americans because they don't want to have this war affecting their own sort of course. They were on a prosperous course and they're economically well off. They don't want all this to be impacted by the events which are going on around Iran in sense of a conflict. So Iran hopes that these countries will be able to pressurize the United States to find some kind of an arrangement.
Right. And Dan Feferman, I think that will be the push and pull in the days to come. The other American allies as well as Israeli allies will try to put pressure on both sides to pull back, given the fact that the energy markets have been jolted by the latest strikes across the Middle East. Secondly, Iran could also dig in its heels and go scorched earth and, retaliate and bring in more nations into the entire fold of this conflict. So it's a very delicate push and pull. Israel, by all means, will continue to hammer the point against Tehran. But at the same time, the pressure is also mounting on American and Israeli allies in the region. Is there a delicate act that Israel has pretty much mapped out how it was likely to play out this entire scenario in the days to come?
It's unclear, and everything we've learned from the last year, let's say maybe more of engagement with Iran and its proxies, is Israel's keeping a lot of cards up its sleeve. Of course, the ultimate goal, or at least what Israel and the United States, and honestly many countries around the region would like to see, is regime change. But of course, there's a limit to how much outside countries can do that, and that is something that needs to come from within, with the United States, Israel, and others helping create the conditions for such a regime change. I think it would, as far as what Israel, the United States, and others are capable of achieving via these strikes and other kinds of operations, is a severe degrading of the capabilities. As I said, nuclear missiles, naval forces, at least on the part of the U.S. and of Iran's proxy array. And should those be degraded significantly and enough, then I can imagine a scenario where in a week, 2 weeks, again, depending on the decisions that the Iranian regime makes, do they come back to the table. But I'm seeing already splits within the Iranian regime between the so-called hardliners, or maybe the independent field commanders, and those sitting in Tehran, led right now by Larijani. And it's not clear which side is going to win, which side is going to have the impact, those who might seek short-term negotiations to calm this down, or those who will seek to continue to escalate and draw this out. And needless to say, I think the American side has all the breathing room to continue this apace, and it is Iran, the regime at least, that is going to be on the ropes here.
Right. So America has the breathing room, but you clearly won't have that breathing room if this entire conflict escalates. We already saw Netanyahu look at the ruins inside Israel, given the operations which are only escalating in the region. Now, currently, there is a section of the Iranian administration that wants dialogue, that wants some level of negotiation to end this conflict. There is also pressure from other Middle Eastern nations. Is there a fear that you could push Iran to go into complete scorched earth and not even have any room for negotiation, where it would just be an escalatory ladder that we see in the Middle East? Is there a fear of that? Because if that happens, clearly both sides will have to throw in all their guns into the war zone, and America will be forced to stay in the region for a longer amount of time. This will help no one at the end of the day, while Iran will only dig in its heels, and you could create a worse Frankenstein monster than what was already there. Is there a fear of that, Dan Feferman?
That's always been the fear, and so Israel has generally, especially the last few years, learned to deal with capabilities and not intentions. Israel thought it could deter Hamas until 2.5 years ago, until it realized it couldn't, and thought it could deter Iran until it realized it couldn't. And so what you're seeing now is a consistent and fast-paced degrading of capabilities. And so this escalation, this no-holds-barred approach, scorched earth, as you put it, my sense is that is something that is increasingly something Iran cannot accomplish, even if it wants to, right? There's only so much that it can accomplish. Its main proxies have been degraded significantly. Now, what you're seeing is a massive escalation against the Arabian Gulf countries who are near to Iran, and there you could see significant and much more severe escalations, including in the Straits of Hormuz, including against oil facilities and tankers. As it relates to Israel, my sense is that there's not a whole lot more Iran could be doing than it is right now, directly from itself or via Hezbollah, and any kind of short-term escalation on the part of Iran would just increase the scope of the military effort by the United States, by Israel, and just draw in the regional powers against Iran even more. And so my sense is that is something that Iran could definitely do, but it would just heighten its demise, its military demise in that sense.
Right, and Prabhu Dayal, so if Iran escalates, it'll be running itself off a cliff, is what Dan Feferman says. But do China and Russia play a factor over here?
Of course they do, because they would like to take advantage of the situation and pump in some weapons into Iran, because they certainly want to keep America embroiled in this conflict. And the only way they can do so is by strengthening Iran and giving it more muscle. Now, China has an easy route through Afghanistan, with which it has very good terms, and also through Turkmenistan. There is plenty of passage available through the northern route. And certainly China, for one, and also Russia, although Russia is embroiled in its own conflict, but it will certainly try to make available some weaponry, because both these countries, along with, let us not forget, North Korea, they would like to assist Iran if it helps Iran to successfully challenge and continue fighting against America. So it's not all that simple. Of course, the countries in the Arabian section of the Gulf, all the countries I mentioned, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, they are upset with Iran, and they will certainly side with America because they have been affected adversely. But what about some other countries who are sitting in the not too distant neighborhood, like, as I said, Russia, China, North Korea? They would like to come to the assistance of Iran and ensure that Iran is not brought to its knees. So it's, in terms of geopolitics, it's not that simple. In fact, it's pretty complicated.
Right. And Prabhu Dayal and Dan Feferman, I want to get your final thoughts on this particular point. There is that notion of global jihad. We've seen stone pelting erupt in the Kashmir Valley as well, given the message that has been sent to the entire world after the assassination of the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Do you see a reboot of global jihad? Would you see terror recruitment going up? Dan Feferman and then Prabhu Dayal.
That's definitely a possibility that intelligence agencies are going to have to be looking at. Of course, anytime there's uptick in this kind of violence, In this case, in the very narrow instance, right, it's the U.S. and Israel that attacked Iran. But even when the jihadist sides launched the attack, they used it as a recruitment tools. And so that is something that we've seen over the last few years has been a massive uptick in both Sunni and Shia jihadist recruitment, and intelligence agencies are going to have to keep an eye on it. This is certainly a complicated issue. As my co-panelist said here, the Russian and Chinese element is something that every side is going to be very careful to navigate and to make sure that they don't get involved. And again, it's all going to be about what is exactly the U.S. primarily and Israel trying to attain here, and can they set very clear and defined goals and then achieve them. It's a big puzzle, of course, but I think at the end of the day, this is going to lead to more stability in the region and not less, with just, of course, this very volatile uptick at this moment.
Right. And Prabhu Dayal, I'll give you the final word on that point.
Well, Islam is a very important factor in countries where it is the predominant religion. I have served in many such countries. And whenever any Muslim country comes under attack from a non-Muslim country, the tendency is for all Muslim countries to somehow come to its aid, to try and support it. Now, there are also non-state actors, which are really speaking terrorist groups. So I'm afraid there could be a very visible resurgence of such terrorist groups. And we have been suffering from the onslaught of some of these. So I'm afraid that the situation as it is evolving in our region is not good at all.
Absolutely. Dan Feferman as well as Prabhu Dayal, thank you so much for decoding all those dynamics associated with the Middle East theater of war. We will continue to track all those developments coming in. But for now, a quick break, more news and updates on the other side as we continue our wall-to-wall coverage on the situation in the Middle East.